All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hokioji's Sunday Morning Dharma Talk. And this morning I have the privilege of introducing our speaker, Reverend Kikan Michael Howard. Kikan started practicing at Clouds and Water in Zen Center in the late 1990s. He was ordained in 2018 and led the youth practice program for 5 years. His interests include Buddhist psychology, emotional dynamics, and data visualization. He produces the website categorytranscripts.net, where he carefully transcribes the Dharma talks of Dainin Category Roshi as an aid to Buddhist study. And he's also an independent app developer. So welcome, Kikan.
Thank you, and good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for coming here on Zoom this morning. So the title of my talk is so-called sudden and gradual. Can you see this okay, and can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I'm seeing some thumbs up. All right, so we have these terms that come up a lot in Zen Buddhism, sudden and gradual. And in particular, there's a particular very famous story that there's this thing in China about the 7th century, around the time of the sixth ancestor. There's a story that there was a northern school of Buddhism that represented the path of gradual enlightenment, and a southern school that represented the path of sudden enlightenment. So that's what I want to talk about today. Since this is Hokioji, I understand Jushin has been doing a series of historical talks, which I think is great. Since this is Hokioji, I'm going to get into some of the history here. And then since this is one of my talks, I'm going to quickly follow that up with what Katagiri Roshi said about this, which includes pretty naturally what Zen Master Eihei Dogen said about it, and what turns out to be pretty much the party line in the Soto Zen school. So let's get into it, shall we? I want to start out by sharing the results of a web search. Hopefully you can read this. Anyway, I'll read it for you. So this is what happens, or this is what happened to me when I put in my this search Northern School in Zen on my iPhone. You get this AI overview. So we're seeing some AI content here. And the interesting thing is I did this search again a little bit later and it came up with slightly different content. So it's like, ooh, spooky. It actually changes over time. So here's what it said about the Northern School of Zen. The Northern School of Zen, also known as Hokushu Zen, emerged in China as one of two schools following the first schism, the other being the Southern School, and is associated with the doctrine of gradual enlightenment. Here's a more detailed explanation. The split. The fifth Chinese Zen patriarch, Hung Jian, that's Huineng, oh no, that's not Huineng, that's how I can't remember the other pronunciation of his name. Anyway, the fifth ancestor had two prominent disciples, Shenzhou, who led the Northern School, and Huineng, who became the sixth patriarch and led the Southern School. Northern School, Shenzhou propagated Zen in northern China and upheld the traditional doctrine of gradual enlightenment. Southern School, Huineng. Huineng, on the other hand, formulated and taught the doctrine of sudden enlightenment, also known as abrupt or immediate enlightenment, and spread Zen in southern China. The decline of the Northern School. The Northern School rapidly declined while Huineng's Southern School became the mainstream of Chinese Zen, and the Japanese Zen schools derived from the Southern School. Okay, so says the AI. And that, I realize, we probably realize that we shouldn't take an AI search result on faith. I did a little digging and found that this is actually sourced. This is probably coming from sources that I wouldn't consider particularly reliable. However, I think this is interesting because this is basically the story that we hear a lot. I think it pretty much encapsulated the kind of basic story here, certainly the one that I heard. And I hear this story coming up today. Just like a couple of weeks ago, a member of the community at Clouds and Water, where I am a priest in training, was expressing to me he was kind of maybe a little disappointed or concerned that we were in the Southern school because the Northern school sounded a lot better to him, or something like that. And I had a response to that, which maybe I'll share later. But that's what really got me thinking about this talk, because I've been transcribing the talks of Katagiri Roshi on the Platform Sutra, which is ostensibly where this story comes from. And well, let's consider this a little bit more carefully. The problem with this story is basically that it's not true. In fact, I would even say that it's in large part nonsense. And would you believe that this story was basically made up by one individual, Shen Wei? And this is his Wikipedia entry. And I added the wanted sign because I thought that would be funny. So let's read what Wikipedia says about this, which is pretty interesting. Shen Wei was a Chinese Buddhist monk of the so-called Southern School, in quotation marks, of Zen, who, quote, claimed to have studied under Hui Neng, the sixth ancestor. Shen Wei is notable for his strident attacks on Shenzhou and the associated Northern School, again in quotation marks, which was the most prominent branch of Chan Buddhism in China at the time. He accused them of propagating gradual teachings, as opposed to his own sudden teachings. Shen Wei's own lineage, called the Heze lineage, probably died out around the time of the great anti-Buddhist persecution in 845, and so on and so forth. So I realize we shouldn't take anything we're reading on Wikipedia on faith either, but this, I believe, is a little bit closer to the mark. Let me see if I can read this again. Yes, Shen Wei. Let me just go to the next slide and finish up reading what the AI says. Key figures: Shen Zhu, founder of the Northern School; Hui Neng, founder of the Southern School; and Shen Wei, a disciple of Hui Neng who played a key role in establishing Hui Neng as the sixth patriarch and promoting the Southern School. Okay, so the search result here is acknowledging that Shen Wei is a figure in propagating this story. And then it says scholarly debate. Some scholars consider Shen Wei's arguments against the Northern School to be fabrications or exaggerations. So this at least shows up in the search result. However, I think it's really the other way around, actually. It's most scholars at this point consider Shen Wei's arguments against the Northern School to be fabrications or exaggerations. And there are some people who still want to stick with the original story. Getting back to this, there were a couple things I wanted to point out. I'm trying to remember what they were. Notably, the Southern School and Northern School in quotation marks, and the concept of gradual teachings as opposed to his own sudden teachings. So Shen Wei was this very interesting. And also that he claimed to have studied under Hui Neng. This happens a lot in the history of Buddhism. People claiming to be disciples of various figures. Actually in the Zen tradition, like in Dogen, for example, it's pointed out occasionally like who the notable disciples of Hui Neng were. And notably, Shen Wei's name does not come up. So That's kind of interesting. But let's get a little bit more into the historical basis of Shen Wei, what we're saying, because this might seem like rather startling to a lot of people. Certainly did to me at first, and yet at this point, I feel I need to say that what I'm presenting today is not actually controversial. This is pretty much the accepted understanding, like kind of the consensus understanding at the moment of the history of the Zen school. And we'll see that it lines up with what Katagiri and Dogen were saying as well. So let's get a little bit, if you look into the footnotes of this Wikipedia article, it references, amongst a couple other scholars, well-known scholars, a scholar named John McCrae. And I just picked up this book. John McCrae is best known for a book called Seeing Through Zen, which does a lot of, I guess we could say, kind of debunking of kind of the mythology of the Zen tradition. I think in a really positive kind of way. I think John McCrae was really interested in understanding what the lineage of Zen really represented. But there's also this interesting book that was put together posthumously based on his research on Shen Wei called Zen Evangelist. Shen Wei, Sudden Enlightenment, and the Southern School of Chan Buddhism. And when McCrae says evangelist, he really means evangelist. McCrae actually saw Shen Wei as almost like a Billy Graham-like figure. Probably like a lot of us are old enough to remember Billy Graham, and if you're not, then Google it. It's pretty interesting. Google Billy Graham televangelism. Shen Wei was basically trying to generate income for his school, as I understand it. And he unleashed a series of kind of polemic attacks. Let's see if this comes up in the reading here. This is McCrae here. Thus, the Platform Sutra's account of the exchange of mind verses between Huineng and Shenzhou of the Northern School, perhaps the most famous anecdote in Chan history, has been discovered to be a creative legend rather than a factual account. Although this is not to say that the legend was unimportant, far from it, the ideas contained in these two verses should not be understood in terms of a simple opposition between the gradual teaching of Shenzhou and the sudden teaching of Huineng. Rather, the two verses constitute a single unit expressing a rarefied understanding of the perfect teaching of constant bodhisattvic practice. That is, one should labor unceasingly to save all other sentient beings from suffering, even as one remained constantly in meditation, but without ever conceptualizing sentient beings' salvific action or meditation. Okay. I included this because I think this is a pretty good summary of what ultimately McCrae ends up saying. But there's actually a couple problems with this too. I think this is actually pretty good. One detail is that we would need to look into a little bit more closely what we mean by saving all other sentient beings and what we mean by suffering. But that's a whole different topic for a whole different talk. My primary problem with this paragraph is the word discovered. It says that this story, one of the most famous anecdotes in Chan history, has been discovered to be a creative legend rather than a factual account. Well, the thing is, the people doing the discovering here are Western scholars. This is something that, if we do a little research, appears to have been like pretty well known, like from the time of Dongshan on in the Soto Zen lineage. And, Dongshan was the guy who founded the Soto Zen lineage. So this is kind of the central thesis of my talk, and I hope to back that up with what I'm going to get into shortly. So my point is, Shen Wei was this really interesting charismatic figure. He was like up on platforms. This may be where the Platform Sutra came from. I'm not sure. There's some scholars who think that Shen Wei contributed to the Platform Sutra. I'm not sure if that's true or not. He influenced it, certainly. not Shenhui, is it Shenhui? Yeah, Shenhui, I got it right. Um, but he was kind of like selling the concept of sudden enlightenment, saying basically just through his words, like the people gathered there right now can reach enlightenment without any special effort. It's very interesting. And this was primarily in the cause of revenue generation. So this is where we kind of start making comparisons to evangelism and Billy Graham, for example. Okay, here's a little bit more from this book from the prologue, which was written by the people who compiled the book after McCrae passed away from pancreatic cancer. McCrae's PhD dissertation built upon Yanagita's work. This was a famous scholar in Japan. The dissertation focused on the Dunhuang manuscripts associated with, quote, East Mountain or Northern School figures such as Daoxin, Hongren, Shenzhou, and Puji. The Dunhuang manuscripts are very interesting. In the early 20th century, like basically a bunch of rolled up manuscripts were discovered behind a hidden door in a secret cave. Seriously, I'm not making this up. Google it. The pictures are amazing. And this is quite recent. This informed the scholarly study in the 20th century. Prior to the discovery of the Dunhuang manuscripts in the early 20th century, the writings of these masters had been all but lost to history, and their teachings known only through the voices of their detractors, namely the professed heirs of Huineng's Southern School. As such, later Chan writings, the Vulgate Chan canon that emerged from the Song and was passed down to the present day, would denigrate the Northern teachings as gradualist and inferior to the Southern teachings of Southern Chan. McCrae's meticulous analysis of the Northern School materials reveals the distortions and biases of the received tradition. To pick a single example, McCrae takes to task the standard narrative that the Northern teachers advocated a gradual path, the Northern teachers viewed Buddhist practice as constituting a step-by-step ascent toward awakening. That's the gradualist path. Instead, McCrae shows that Northern teachers taught something closer to constant practice, an approach that anticipates later Soto Zen teachings in Japan. For the Northern school, Chan practice was not a means to achieving liberation, so much as a moment-to-moment recognition and affirmation of what is already the case, that is, of one's abiding bodhi. Okay, this is all pretty good also. The problem, I have the same criticism as with the preceding section from McCrae, is that the idea that this was discovered because of the Dunhuang scrolls, as important as those scrolls were, is somewhat laughable. Because the figures no less than Dogen were commenting on this like all along. Nevertheless, they do. I think they are getting to the correct point here. McCrae is showing that Northern teachers taught something closer to constant practice. What they're describing here is pretty close to Dogen's concept of practice realization, which is very important in our tradition. And I would say it's pretty much the same thing. So are you kind of getting this here? It's like there really wasn't so much of a distinction between the Northern school and the Southern school. And historically, a lot of what we think of as Southern school teachings was coming from what was later identified as the Northern school. This split like never really was the kind of actual thing, except in kind of like poetic terms that were used later. All right, so to back this up, how are we doing on time here? Okay, we got a little bit of time. To back this up, I'd like to share with you some teachings of Katagiri Roshi. He did a series of talks on the Platform Sutra. And this is available on katagiritranscripts.net. This is where I do my work of putting the transcripts of transcribing Katagiri Roshi's talks and putting them online. There's a section on the Platform Sutra And it says here, the Platform Sutra is a text containing teachings attributed to Hui Neng, sixth ancestor of Chan Zen in China. Note how I use the word attributed there. And talk one is what we're going to focus on, just bits of it. Platform Sutra Talk 1, Katagiri Roshi introduces a series of 7 talks on the Platform Sutra. This talk comments on Chapter 1, Action and Intention, which includes the famous poetry contest. He discusses the controversy of whether the point of Zen is to, quote, see into one's own nature and achieve Buddhahood. Okay, a quick digression about this. Do I have that on the next slide? No, I don't. But a quick preview of coverage of this topic that I may or may not have time to get to, but I want to make sure we touch on it. To see into one's own nature, that is a translation of the Japanese kensho. Most of you have probably heard and know the term kensho, right? As in the kensho experience. This is essentially an experience of what you could call sudden enlightenment. And what we're seeing here is that there is a controversy that Dogen addresses and that Katagiri Roshi refers to over whether that is the actual point of Zen practice. And spoiler, Dogen essentially says no. But the details are very interesting. So again, the Platform Sutra is kind of where this canonical story that we saw earlier in the AI search results, where that story is coming from. It's vividly depicted here. So here's a little bit of the Platform Sutra and Katagiri Roshi's commentary on it. This is from the very beginning almost, which is the historical part, or the historical story about Hui Neng, the sixth ancestor, his origins. Once a customer bought firewood. Hui Neng had a job selling firewood originally, and ordered it delivered to his shop. When the delivery had been made and Hui Neng had received the money, he went outside the gate where he noticed a customer reciting a sutra. Upon once hearing the words of this sutra, one should produce that thought which is nowhere supported. Hui Neng's mind immediately opened to enlightenment. This is from the Sixth Patriarch's Dharma Jewel Platform Sutra, published and translated by the Buddhist Text Translation Society. And here we're at the very beginning of Katagiri Roshi's first talk on the Platform Sutra, and the recording got started a little late, so it cuts in all of a sudden. So it's about, Katagiri Roshi says, the mind which is clear and pure originally. So one should produce the mind which is nowhere supported, because the truth is not something like stagnant water. The truth is moving and active. So there is nothing to hold in your hand. There is nothing to support. Nowhere supported, nowhere attached. This is the meaning of one should produce the mind which is nowhere supported. And then Hui Neng attained enlightenment at that time. Next, back to the sutra. Thereupon, he asked the customer what sutra he was reciting. The customer replied, the Diamond Sutra. Then again he asked, where do you come from, and why do you recite this sutra? The customer said, I come from Dungchan Monastery in Chichou, Wangmei Province. There the fifth patriarch, the great master Hung Jung, dwells, teaching over 1,000 disciples. I went there to make obeisance and heard and received this sutra. The great master constantly exhorts the Sangha and laity only to uphold the Diamond Sutra. Then they may see their own nature and straightway achieve Buddhahood. Again, there's that may see their own nature thing. Hui Neng heard this and desired to go and seek the Dharma, but he recalled that his mother had no support. From past lives, there were karmic conditions which led another man to give Hui Neng a pound of silver so that he could provide clothing and food for his aging mother. The man instructed him further to go to Wangmei to call upon and bow to the fifth patriarch. So here's Katagiri Roshi again. The fifth patriarch constantly emphasizes the spirit of the Diamond Sutra, saying they may see their own nature and straightway achieve Buddhahood. This is very common. Zen Buddhism always talks about this, whether in Japan or in China. The real spirit of Zen is to see into one's own nature and achieve Buddhahood or become Buddha straightforwardly. That is a point Zen Buddhism always says. But I think this is a little bit questionable, Katagiri Roshi says. Dogen Zenji talks about this. I think you should read the chapter Buddha Nature in Shobogenzo, and also in the book Zen Master Dogen. Dogen Zenji talks about monks of the 4 stages of meditation. That's Shizen Biku. I think in this chapter he talks about the criticism toward that point that Zen usually says, to see into one's own nature and become straightaway Buddhahood. For instance, he says in that chapter, the essence of Buddha... Oh, so here's Zen Master Dogen, okay? The essence of Buddha Dharma has never been to see into one's own nature. Which of the 7 past Buddhas, or 28 Indian patriarchs, ever said that Buddha Dharma consisted merely of seeing into one's own nature? Well, I actually have an answer to that, but I shouldn't share it now. It is true that the 6th patriarch spoke about this question in the Platform Sutra, but as this is a forged writing, emphasis mine there, it cannot be said to represent his true teachings or to have the transmission of the Dharma. We descendants of the Buddha shouldn't rely on this. That's kind of a remarkable statement, isn't it? Something like that, Katagiri Roshi says. And in the Sutra of the Mountains and Waters, Dogen Zenji says also, transforming the environment, transforming the mind is something scorned by great sages. Speaking of mind, speaking of nature. Speaking of nature means speaking of one's original nature. Is something not approved by Buddhas and Zen adepts. Seeing into the mind, seeing into one's own nature, is the livelihood of heretics. That's the key line I'm going to focus on here. Seeing into one's own nature is the livelihood of heretics. Sticking to words and phrases is not the expression of liberation. Regarding that line, I looked this up to confirm what I'm saying. There's a wonderful translation that actually just came out from the Soto Shu, the official Soto Zen organization in Japan. Complete translation of Shobogenzo, which is Dogen's masterwork. And you can spend some money and order a hard copy of this, but amazingly, you can go to the Soto Shu site and download a PDF of this entire thing, which is extremely useful for research purposes. I've already used it several times to dig up references in Katagiri Roshi's talks that I probably would not have been able to find anywhere else, including on the internet. So here's what it says about seeing the mind and seeing nature. In a footnote, there's the word kensho. Not a common combination, though of course Zen tradition was famous for claiming that one could, quote, see one's nature and attain Buddhahood, kensho jobutsu, a saying attributed to no less than Bodhidharma himself. See supplementary notes, etc. In his Shobogenzo Shizen Biku, however, Dogen strongly criticizes this claim, saying, where among the 7 Buddhas and 28 Indian ancestors does one find it said that the Buddha Dharma is just seeing the nature? You with me so far? Okay, let's keep going along. Back to Katagiri Roshi. So Dogen Zenji strongly criticizes the pretty usual emphasis of Zen Buddhism in those days, or even now. Because if you emphasize that the main point of Zen Buddhism is seeing into one's own nature by Zazen, at that time I think it is still very dualistic. So by Zazen and by Zen practice, you have to see the true nature of the self and then become Buddha. That is a pretty usual understanding of Zen practice and Buddhist practice. But at that time, in the basic state of existence, I think you cannot be free from agitations and hesitations, uneasiness of your mind always, because you try to get peace and harmony dualistically. You think, I am not perfect, that's why I need something. So that is always something agitating you and makes your life uneasy. But Dogen Zenji always says your basic nature is exactly Buddha. It is not just Dogen's teaching, but the Nirvana Sutra and also the Diamond Sutra and the Prajnaparamita Sutra says this. The Nirvana Sutra mentions constantly that we are Buddha. All sentient beings are Buddha. So we have to stand up in the Buddha nature, stand up at the place where all sentient beings are Buddha from the beginning to end. That is the main point. So what this is discussing, I believe, is actually pertinent to, if not the same thing as, the discussion of sudden and so-called gradual. The term gradual doesn't really make any sense in this context because gradual assumes that there's a goal that one is gradually progressing towards, and that's the opposite of what Dogen is talking about. However, sudden, I believe, is relevant here in the sense of sudden enlightenment, which is pretty close to or the same as Kensho, um, seeing into one's nature and achieving Buddhahood. Does that make sense so far? Um, so later on, this is a wonderful talk, and I recommend you going and looking at it on the website katagiritranscripts.net. It's a whole series of talks on the Platform Sutra, but we could spend a long time just discussing the first talk. I'm covering just the smallest part of it, and I want to point out here that this is actually the first part of the talk. Katagiri Roshi, in discussing the Platform Sutra, immediately goes to this point about the historical veracity, you could say, of the Platform Sutra and its relationship to Kensho, which is basically equivalent to sudden enlightenment. And that's not Katagiri Roshi, I think, doing something kind of strange. I think that's actually like a central core point. That's why he's getting to it first. However, it is important to get to the actual story, which maybe we'll have time for. We'll see. But later on, much later in the talk, there's usually questions and answers at the end of this talk, or at the end of the Katagiri Roshi's talks. And people often ask some really good probing questions, basic questions that you would want answered. And the first question I think that comes up in this talk is someone asks, so, Dogen considered this a forgery? Some of us might find that somewhat alarming. So here's what Katagiri Roshi said about that. Not only Dogen. I think the introduction written by Echu, who was one of Huineng's disciples, talks about this. Originally, the Platform Sutra was written by one of the 6 patriarchs' disciples, but he didn't publish it. And then other monks, other disciples, always carried it, and passages which the other disciples had directly heard of, the 6 patriarchs' teaching, were added to the original version. That's why it's mixed up. Katagiri Roshi's own words there. And because this is an interesting point, I did some research and added a note here. It's not clear what introduction is referred to above, but there is a reference to Echu, also known as National Master Daisho, in Shobogenzo Sokoshin Zeibutsu, Mind Here and Now as Buddha, where ostensibly he discusses the Platform Sutra. And I'm going to follow up on that in the next slide. So continuing with Katagiri Roshi, that is the general understanding in Japan, in China about this. So it's not exactly the 6 patriarchs' teaching. We are disappointed if we hear that, but still we use the 6 patriarchs' Platform Sutra as one of the Zen Buddhist textbooks. So that's why Dogen Zenji criticizes it, although criticism is not the right word. Dogen Zenji tries to let us know what the real teaching of the 6th patriarch is, instead of putting it down. So that's why a key point of Zen practice is, quote, to see into one's own nature and become Buddha. But that is pretty dualistic. That is the point Dogen Zenji tries to say in Shobogenzo. There's another place where Katagiri Roshi covers this in his talks on the Jewel Mirror Samadhi. If you're familiar with the Jewel Mirror Samadhi, there's a line that references sudden and gradual, and this whole thing comes up again, which I have slides for, but we won't nearly have time to go into. But he says essentially the same thing here, but it's interesting that he says were interested in not only understanding the six patriarchs' teachings, the true nature of the six patriarchs' teachings, but also the teachings of Shenzhou, the northern school guy. Okay, we'll get to that in a moment. Because I did some research and it's really interesting. I wanted to follow up on this note about mind here and now as Buddha and what Katagiri Roshi is saying about Eichu. Um, so this is from Mind Here and Now as Buddha. The master says, the master is referring to National Master Daisho, who was purportedly a Dharma heir of the sixth ancestor. The master says, if it is so, they are no different from the non-Buddhist Seneca. I mean, this is responding to a point above. We'll get into the interesting part in a moment. Seneca said, in our body, there is a single spiritual essence. This essence can recognize pain and irritation. When the body decays, the spirit departs. Just as when a house is burning, the master of the house departs. The house is inconstant, the master of the house is constant. Now here's the key part. When I examine people like this, they do not know the false from the true. How can they decide what is right? When I was on my travels, I often saw this kind. Recently, they are very popular. They gather assemblies of 300 or 500 people and, eyes gazing toward the heavens, they say, this is the fundamental teaching of the South. Teaching of the South? This isn't subtle. They take the Platform Sutra and change it, mixing in folk stories and erasing its sacred meaning. They delude and disturb recent students. How could theirs be called the oral teaching? And here we assume the oral teaching, they're referring to the oral teaching of the sixth patriarch. It's the sixth ancestor. He's saying, in other words, the folk legends that grew up are not the original teachings of the sixth ancestor. How painful it is that our religion is being lost. If seeing, hearing, awareness, and recognition could be equated with the Buddha nature, and so on, making the point. So later, next paragraph, Dogen Zen Master comments about this. National Master Daisho is an excellent disciple of the eternal Buddha of Sokai. He is a great good counselor in heaven above and in the human world. We should clarify the fundamental teaching set forth by the National Master and regard it as a criterion for the learning and practice, etc. In other words, Dogen approves of this statement. Okay. So that's kind of my historical dump for you about kind of the commentary on the Platform Sutra. And next we can get into the kind of actual story itself, which in most talks I would probably cover first, but I thought that some people here would be interested in the historical aspect, so I wanted to make sure we got to that. But to review, this criticism of the Platform Sutra and the concepts of gradual and sudden goes back a long way, much further than Dogen. And in fact, Katagiri Roshi says that this understanding is coming from basic Mahayana Buddhism considerably before even the founding of the Soto school. That's Zen Master Dogen's opinion. Or that's Katagiri Roshi's opinion. Katagiri Roshi usually represents Zen Master Dogen's opinion, in my opinion. Got a chain of opinions here. So about midway through this wonderful talk on the Platform Sutra, we get to the actual kind of like core part of the first part of the Platform Sutra, which is the story. This is getting back to the search results, okay? The contest between Shenzhou and Huineng, who became the sixth ancestor. The background for this is that the fifth ancestor said that it's time to determine who will be my successor. So everyone who's achieved enlightenment, please, or everyone who's had an enlightenment experience, please write a verse expressing your understanding. And basically everyone in the monastery chickened out, except for Shenzhou, who was the Shuso, Everyone else was saying, well, Shenzhou is our guy. We want him to write the verse. So there's a lot of pressure on Shenzhou. And again, Shenzhou is not Shen Wei. Shenzhou is the guy who Shen Wei is criticizing later on. So here's the verse from the Platform Sutra that Shenzhou wrote, allegedly. The body is a Bodhi tree, the mind like a bright mirror stand. Time and again brush it clean, and let no dust alight. After writing this verse, this is from the Platform Sutra, Shenzhou returned to his room, and the others did not know what he had done. Then he thought, if the fifth patriarch sees the verse tomorrow and is pleased, it will mean that I have an affinity with the Dharma. If he says that it does not pass, it will mean that I am confused by heavy karmic obstacles from past lives, and that I am not fit to obtain the Dharma. It is difficult to fathom the sage's intentions. In this room, he thought it over and could not sit still or sleep peacefully right through to the fifth watch. Katagiri says, so anyway, he couldn't sleep because he was very concerned about his poem written on the wall. There's a lot of kind of humor in this story, actually. So here's the core of the Katagiri Roshi's commentary on this, and it's actually pretty short. So here it goes. Katagiri Roshi says, his poem is pretty well known by everyone as one of the Zen stories. As McRae says, or somebody says, this is one of the core stories in Zen Buddhism. The body is a Bodhi tree, the mind like a bright mirror stand. Time and again brush it clean, and let no dust alight. And later, Huineng, who would become the sixth ancestor, also wrote his poem. His poem is, originally, Bodhi has no tree. The bright mirror has no stand. Originally, there is not a single thing. Where can dust alight? Okay, and here's what Katagiri Roshi says. Sometimes people deal with the two poems separately and evaluate which is right, which is wrong. But I don't think that is the right understanding. I'll say that again. But I don't think that is the right understanding. Both poems work together in our practice. I think you cannot separate them. So according to Shenzhou, I think he stands always in the dualistic world, looking at himself and trying to reach the Buddha nature. So from this point, the body is a Bodhi tree. We are Buddha nature, but we are not Buddha nature. So we have to realize, we have to see into our own nature. So the body is a Bodhi tree, the mind like a bright mirror stand. This is exactly the same as the teaching of Nirvana. So we are Buddha. Time and again brush it clean, but we are living in the human world, so it's easy for us to get dusty. That's why we always have to brush it clean and let no dust alight. This is a point of our practice, so constantly practice. This is one aspect of the practice, seeking for the truth constantly, from the beginning to end. Even if you attain enlightenment, even if you become Buddha, constantly we have to seek. And on the other hand, the other aspect of practice is to descend to the human world, to share your life with all sentient beings, because there is no particular thing. This is the spirit of Huineng's poem. Originally, Bodhi has no tree, the bright mirror has no stand, because our foundation is already Buddha nature, so there is no particular thing to discuss or to forget. So constantly we have to stand up there, and then we can deal with the human world. Originally, there is not a single thing. Where can dust alight? So we have to descend to the human world and save all sentient beings. So we need both. Both work together in our practice. Okay, do you have questions? Katagiri Roshi says. So in case this wasn't clear enough, I want to fast forward slightly to one of the questions, which is one of the shortest question and answer exchanges I think I've noted in Katagiri Roshi's talks. Someone follows up, Hojo-san, if Shenzhou's poem speaks to one aspect of our life reality, and Huineng's poem speaks to another aspect, is real reality beyond either of them? Katagiri Roshi's answer is yes, and they work together. Simple, clear question. Simple, clear answer, I guess. So what else do I have here? Oh yeah. So that's kind of the main part of my presentation. I mean, I could go on and on about supporting details. What's interesting, or one thing that's interesting to me, is I'm trying to portray here that this is the understanding in the Soto Zen lineage, which is our lineage or our branch of Buddhism. But the real kicker here for me is this must have also been the understanding in much of the Rinzai lineage as well, even though they're more associated with sudden enlightenment. Later on, this development happens because if you read the Blue Cliff record, it, my understanding of it and the understanding that I think, well, that understanding I think is coming from Katagiri Roshi's commentary and Dogen's commentaries, but it presents sudden and gradual, or sometimes they use the word slow and fast, in very much the same way. Um, so I think that if, the Blue Cliff record as a koan collection in the Rinzai tradition, going way back historically, I think if that were really adhering to the kind of simplistic understanding of sudden enlightenment, we wouldn't be using it as a source of Zen understanding. So I think there was a lot of understanding of this, presumably even in the Rinzai line. Um, so there we are. Maybe to wrap up, and then I'll go to questions. I'll share like one little bit, kind of. Oh, here we go. The conclusion. This might be a nice little chaser for all of that. So this is from Katagiri Roshi's commentary on Blue Cliff Record Case 45, Jiaozhou's 7-pound cloth shirt. One of many cases where the sudden or the gradual or fast or slow is being discussed. In the second paragraph here, Katagiri Roshi says something very interesting. Zen history says Soto Zen is gradual enlightenment. Rinzai Zen is sudden enlightenment. It's ridiculous, he laughs. If you talk about this, it's ridiculous. If you're really crazy about this discussion, you don't understand Zen Buddhism. You don't understand Buddha's teaching. You don't understand human life. He chuckles. History is history. Don't worry about it. If you see someone who is interested in history, let him do that. But don't be involved in it too much. He chuckles. Maybe to sum up, I'll continue on a little bit more after that. So what is it about? Katagiri Roshi says, so I say, living is like a leaping fish. Leaping fish is exactly like a flash of lightning, which is what was being referenced in the Blue Cliff record pointer here. Because you don't know what it is. If you say fish, fish already becomes a concept, But fish is not fish. Fish is moving. So you say it's movement? No, it's not movement. It's a fish. But it's not a fish, it's movement. What can you call this? Movement? No. Movement means energy, inherent to everything. So can you say energy? No, it's a fish. So you can say fish, but it's not. So how can you say it? The total leaping fish. That total leaping fish is something you can learn. You can learn, you can express yourself right in the middle of what? Pure sincerity, pure heart. That is wholeheartedness. And then you can express. That is called the universe. So that's why the leaping fish is very beautiful, very active, very impressive. Okay. So there's a lot more that I would like to get into, but that was probably a lot of material. So I think I'll open it up to question and discussions.
All right, questions, comments.
So in this other book, the Kim book on
Oh,
mystical
Kim, yeah.
mystical
Mhm.
real. Dogen says, criticizes this idea of seeing into one's nature. He says, seeing itself is one's nature.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of the non-dualistic part. But seeing into one's nature, if we don't know about the translation of Kensho as seeing into one's nature, we can say that seeing into one's nature is we see that we're confused. We see that we have a pretty dusty life. And we also have these other aspects of our life. We see the wholeness of seeing into one's nature, but I didn't know seeing into one's nature referenced Kensho. I kind of like not knowing that it was Kensho.
Well, I struggled with this talk because the part that I really wanted to bring in, but there's just too much material, was Dogen's use of three different Japanese terms, at least three different Japanese terms, representing enlightenment, or essentially these are things that often get translated as enlightenment. So first of all, the Kim part, yes, that you were quoting, yeah, that's nice. Um, for me, I think my thought about that is seeing is good, but I don't think that that's exactly one time seeing into one's nature seeing. I think that that's like ongoing seeing, which I would express as Dogen's practice realization concept. Okay. According to Katagiri, another thing I transcribed recently was Katagiri Roshi's talks on Benduwa. This is also available on the website. And the last talk, talk 5 in the Benduwa series, which is the last thing that he talked, and the last talk he gave on Benduwa, which is a very fundamental introduction to Zazen and Zen practice. Alongside, it's like the second thing he wrote after Fukan Zazengi. Um, anyway, Katagiri Roshi explains further about the term sho, which is the one that's being used as practice realization or practice enlightenment. He says that it's very difficult to translate, but basically there are three terms that get used often by Dogen that kind of mean enlightenment or are translated that way. The first one, I believe, is kaku, which is awakening. And then there is satori, which is a word that we have probably heard about, right? I'm sure, which is often translated enlightenment. Enlightenment. And then there is sho, which is he's still working at the time on how to translate that in the clearest way. So he does some explanation around this term. Sho apparently literally means realization or verification. And I think this is where Dogen's concept of practice realization or practice enlightenment is coming in. So the point here is that the first two terms are things that we experience. Particularly the first one, awakening, that's kind of a mental experience. And then Satori is regarded as more of a whole body, mind and body kind of experience. So it's like a little bit deeper. Okay. But both of these two are individual experiences. Katagiri Roshi describes them as basically bubbles coming up. Okay. They're here and they're gone. Show is something more basic that we can, I think, approach. But show is going on all the time, and we can participate in it, practice realization. So when Kim, getting back to your point, when Kim talks about enlightenment as being seeing, I'd like to think of that in terms of practice realization, or Kim uses the term practice enlightenment, which is probably not incorrect, but I think that having enlightenment in the term there might be a little bit misleading because then you immediately think that it's a sudden and one time kind of thing. as in, like Kensho. By the way, I looked into this, and Kensho and Sho are apparently different shows. Okay, so I think if I understand it, that Sho isn't the same thing as Kensho. Kensho is usually considered as equivalent to Satori. Does that all make sense? You want to add anything? No. It's like so. Let me do a quick summary of the entire talk. Okay, this isn't any different from basic Buddhism coming up in the Diamond Sutra, going back to this fundamental concept of first there are mountains, then there are not mountains, then there are mountains again. Okay, so we have our original idea of the world, you could say, and then we negate that vision, but then we don't stay in the negation. Okay, we come back to a broader picture of the world. Hopefully, I can. It's close to what it means, something like that. This poem, the poems in the Platform Sutra are, many would say, the same pattern. Okay, this may be somewhat controversial, but many would say, or some would say, that Shenzu's poem, the dualistic one, is mountains are mountains. And then Weineng comes in with mountains are not mountains. What are you talking about? But the reality is the dynamic expressed by the two poems working together. This is what I think Katagiri Roshi is alluding to. You want to follow up on that, Rushin, or challenge it, or
If I remember the McCrae book right, the manuscripts they found in the cave indicated that there were two different weaning responses
yeah.
to the to the poetry contest, and the one that we know is the one that got, I don't know, distributed or published. But
Edited, yeah.
there was originally another response
hmm
that got clarified at some point. So
Yeah, there were like working drafts of this like all along, which kind of clearly indicates that this was not an actual thing that happened. This is a teaching story. This is a metaphor. Yeah, there's a lot of details like that. It's like I'm not. I mean, I don't have time to be a full-time scholar in this area either, so I'm only kind of like surfing the top of, as I think most of us kind of are probably, of this study. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in McCrae. For example, like if I understand it correctly, like a lot of the terms, the basic, concepts that Weineng, the sixth ancestor, is using in his poem actually come from the Northern school. So again, there's this kind of dynamic between the two. They're really not these separate things, right? To the extent they even exist at all. They may be useful kind of like for poetry and metaphorical purposes. There may actually even be some value in talking about sudden enlightenment that may have some resonance. But I think we need, when we start looking at the story like a little bit too literally, we might need to walk back and look at things more closely. It's like I agree with, so Katagiri Roshi is making an interesting point with the, not taking history too far, because boy, you can spend like your entire life going down these rabbit holes and miss like the actual point that's like right in front of your face, right? Nevertheless, my kind of counter argument is that we're already in the intellectual world. And there's a certain understanding that has been passed down actually by teachers in our tradition from century after century. And I think that we should look at what that tradition actually is and try to understand it as best we can, and then go do our meditation and forget about it.
On that note, we're almost done, but I did want to. I want to add something here. Is something we probably have often heard. The way is basically perfect and all pervading. How could it be contingent upon practice and realization? The Dharma vehicle is free and untrammeled. What need is there for concentrated effort? Indeed, the whole body is far beyond the world's dust. Who could believe in a means to brush it clean? It is never apart from one, right where one is. That's the start of the Fukan Zazengi. So
Hmm.
Dogen seems to be leaning hard into the second poem.
Well, he doesn't stop there, though. And the next
Yeah, but
words are "and yet."
if there's
The
the
second
slightest
poem.
discrepancy, yeah. So it's not. I mean, all of it is a retcon. Mahayana is a retcon. Zen is a
Hmm.
retcon. I mean, I guess the end of the day is probably practice.
Look, I think this is an area where it's worth looking deeply. And one thing I'll note is um, Katagiri Roshi's talks are really kind of a holistic representation of Soto Zen Buddhist teaching. So, for example, I just discovered that the series of talks on Bendua include a lot of really important commentary on Fukan Zazengi. So, for like deeper study of Fukan Zazengi, I would recommend not only the series on Fukan Zazengi, which is just like a short part of Fukan Zazengi, but the talks on Bendua are like a really good place to start.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kikan.
Thank you.
And let's see what we got going on. Next week we have Alex Dozen Lawrence will be our speaker. And the goings on at Hokioji, I had these all here. I let's see, our 6 week Genjo Koan online study group just started last Monday. You could probably join still if you wanted to. You should sign up. Although probably let me know that you signed up so I can let them know you signed up. April 10th is Caring for the Land. So if you want to go get some work practice realization in and fight the good fight against the buckthorn and similar invasive species, we could use your help at Caring for the Land. And then, well, it's not. Maybe somebody will watch this recording, but on May 1st is the True Heart Women's Retreat. The assembled are not invited, but we'll all wish them well. And then May 25th is the Just Sitting Retreat, which is I can never remember the two rules: be quiet and don't tell anyone what to do. It's something along those lines. So very simple. So thank you all for coming today, and sorry, have a good Sunday wherever you happen to be.
Thank
And
you.
let's
Are you
close.
going to dedicate the merit?
Oh yeah, as soon as I stop choking.
Oh dear.
Yeah. All right. Oops, I muted myself. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you, everyone.